counter the Kehoe article or any other story that might appear. The plan originated at ATIC. It called for a general officer to hold a short press conference, flash his stars, and speak the magic words hoaxes, hallucinations, and the misidentification of known objects. True, Kehoe, and the rest would go broke trying to peddle their magazines. The True article did come out, the general spoke, the public laughed, and Kehoe and True got rich. Only the other magazines that had planned to run UFO stories, and that were scooped by True, lost out. Their stories were killed. They would have been an anticlimax to Kehoe's potboiler. The Air Force's short press conference was followed by a press release. On December 27, 1949, it was announced that Project Grudge had been closed out and the final report on UFOs would be released to the press in a few days. When it was released, it caused widespread interest because, supposedly, this was all that the Air Force knew about UFOs. Once again, instead of throwing large amounts of cold water on the UFOs, it only caused more confusion. The report was officially titled Unidentified Flying Objects, Project Grudge. Technical Report AC-49/15-100, but it was widely referred to as the Grudge Report. The Grudge Report was a typical military report. There was the body of the report, which contained the short discussion, conclusion, and recommendations. Then there were several appendixes that were supposed to substantiate the conclusions and recommendations made in the report. One of the appendixes was the final report of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Project Grudge's contract astronomer. Dr. Hynek and his staff had studied 237 of the best UFO reports. They had spent several months analyzing each report. By searching through astronomical journals and checking the locations of various celestial bodies, they found that some UFOs could be explained. Of the 237 reports he and his staff examined, 32% could be explained astronomically. The Air Force Air Weather Service and the Air Force Cambridge Research Laboratory had sifted the reports for UFOs that might have been balloons. These two organizations had data on the flights of both the regular weather balloons and the huge high-flying skyhooks. They wrote off 12% of the 237 UFO reports under study as balloons. This left 56% still unknown. By weeding out the hoaxes, the reports that were too nebulous to evaluate, and reports that could well be misidentified airplanes, Project Grudge disposed of another 33% of the reports. This left 23% that fell in the unknown category. There were more appendixes. The RAND Corporation, one of the most unpublicized yet highly competent contractors to the Air Force, looked over the reports and made the statement, "We have found nothing which would seriously controvert simple, rational explanations of the various phenomena in terms of balloons, conventional aircraft, planets, meteors, bits of paper, optical illusions, practical jokers, psychopathological reporters, and the like." But Rand's comment didn't help a great deal, because they didn't come up with any solutions to any of the 23% unknown. The psychology branch of the Air Force's Aeromedical Laboratory took a pass at the psychological angles. They said, "There are sufficient psychological explanations for the reports of unidentified objects to provide plausible explanations for reports not otherwise explainable." they pointed out that some people have spots in front of their eyes due to minute solid particles that float about in the fluids of the eye and cast shadows on the retina. Then they pointed out that some people are just plain nuts. Many people who read the Grudge Report took these 2 points to mean that all UFO observers either had spots in front of their eyes or were nuts. They broke the reports down statistically. The people who wrote the report found that over 70% of the people making sightings reported a light-colored object. This I doubt, but that's what the report said. They said a big point of these reports of light-colored objects was that any high-flying object will appear to be dark against the sky. For this reason, the UFOs couldn't be real. I suggest that the next time you are outdoors and see a bomber go over at high altitude, you look at it closely. Unless it's painted a dark color, it won't look dark. The U.S. Weather Bureau wrote an extremely comprehensive and interesting report on all types of lightning. It was included in the Grudge Report, but contained a note, "None of the incidents appear to have been lightning." There was one last appendix. It was entitled, "Summary of the Evaluation of Remaining Reports." What the title meant was, we have 23% of the reports that we can't explain, but we have to explain them because we don't believe in flying saucers. This appendix contributed greatly to the usage of the analogy to the Dark Ages, the age of intellectual stagnation. This appendix was important. It was the meat of the whole report. Every UFO sighting had been carefully checked, and those with answers had been sifted out. Then the ones listed in Summary of the Evaluation of Remaining Reports should be the best UFO reports, the ones with no answers. This was the appendix that the newsmen grabbed at when the Grudge Report was released. It contained the big story. But if you'll check back through old newspaper files, you will hardly find a mention of the Grudge Report. I was told that reporters just didn't believe it when I tried to find out why the Grudge Report hadn't been mentioned in the newspapers. I got the story from a newspaper correspondent in Washington whom I came to know pretty well and who kept me filled in on the latest UFO scuttlebutt being passed around the Washington press circles. He was one of those humans who had a brain like a filing cabinet. He could remember everything about everything. UFOs were a hobby of his. He remembered when the Grudge Report came out. In fact, he'd managed to get a copy of his own. He said the report had been quite impressive, but only in its ambiguousness, illogical reasoning, and very apparent effort to write off all UFO reports at any cost. He personally thought they were full of misleading information to cover up the real story. Others, he told me, just plain and simply didn't know what to think. They were confused. And they had every right to be confused. As an example of the way that many of the better reports of the 1947 to 1949 period were evaluated, let's take the report of a pilot who tangled with a UFO near Washington, D.C. on the night of November 18, 1948. At about 9:45 Eastern Standard Time, I noticed a light moving generally north to south over Andrews Air Force Base. It appeared to be one continuous glowing white light. I thought it was an aircraft with only one landing light, so I moved in closer to check, as I wanted to get into the landing pattern. I was well above landing traffic altitude at this time. As I neared the light, I noticed that it was not another airplane. Just then it began to take violent evasive action, so I tried to close on it. I made first contact at 2,700 feet over the field. I switched my navigation lights on and off, but got no answer, so I went in closer. But the light quickly flew up and over my airplane. I then tried to close again, but the light turned. I tried to turn inside of its turn and, at the same time, get the light between the moon and me. But even with my flaps lowered, I couldn't turn inside the light. I never did manage to get into a position where the light was silhouetted against the moon. I chased the light up and down and around for about 10 minutes. Then, as a last resort, I made a pass and turned on my landing lights. Just before the object made a final tight turn and headed for the coast, I saw that it was a dark gray oval-shaped object, smaller than my T6. I couldn't tell if the light was on the object or if the whole object had been glowing. 2 officers and a crew chief, a master sergeant, completely corroborated the pilot's report. They had been standing on the flight line and had witnessed the entire incident. The Air Weather Service, who had been called in as experts on weather balloons, read this report. They said, "Definitely not a balloon." Dr. Hynek said, "No astronomical explanation." It wasn't another airplane, and it wasn't a hallucination. But Project Grudge had an answer. It was a weather balloon. There was no explanation as to why they had so glibly reversed the decision of the Air Weather Service. There was an answer for every report. From the 600 pages of appendixes, discussions of the appendixes, and careful studies of UFO reports, it was concluded that evaluation of reports of unidentified flying objects constitute no direct threat to the national security of the United States. Reports of unidentified flying objects are the result of a mild form of mass hysteria or war nerves. Individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetrate a hoax or seek publicity. Psychopathological persons. Misidentification of various conventional objects. It was recommended that Project Grudge be reduced in scope and that only those reports clearly indicating realistic technical applications be sent to Grudge. There was a note below these recommendations. It said, "It is readily apparent that further study along present lines would only confirm the findings presented herein." Somebody read the note and concurred, because with the completion and approval of the Grudge Report, Project Grudge folded. People could rant and rave, see flying saucers, pink elephants, sea serpents, or Harvey, but it was no concern of ATIC's. End of Chapter 5. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 6 of The Report on Unidentified Flying Object. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Report on Unidentified Flying Object by Edward Ruppelt.